Hey everyone, welcome back. This is episode 14 of At the Kitchen Table podcast. I am Jason Klink, your host, and it's my esteemed pleasure to bring to the podcast today Ivan Whitaker. He is not only a professional colleague, but he's a friend and a co-creator in the podcast space. And with that, I'd like to bring in Ivan for a great conversation both on 911 communication, emergency communications, and public safety, organizational culture and leadership, but also talk a little bit about podcasting. So, with that, here's today's episode 14 of At the Kitchen Table podcast. To sit here and have as a guest Ivan Whitaker. Ivan is the executive director and CEO of the Salt Lake City Valley Emergency Communication Center, better known as VEC to us in the public safety world. Ivan is also the podcast originator and host of Beyond the Launch podcast. Ivan, I appreciate you joining me here today.
Happy to be here, Jason. Yes, you've been doing some great things, so happy to be here to support you.
I appreciate that. I had the pleasure of being on one of the original episodes of Ivan's Beyond the Launch podcast, where it focuses a lot on customer success, customer journey, and collaborating that between public sector, private sector, which we've both worked in. You went from working in public safety emergency communications to being in public safety technology and in that space, and then going back. When you were making that journey, what ultimately led you from civil service to public sector back to civil service?
It was, kind of, I don't think it really was my doing. I think it was more so of time and moment. And so when I think back on it, I was actually a director at a center in Winter Haven, Florida, the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and became an instructor and was teaching regionally. And then after the merger of about 13 dispatch centers merging into one, and we ended up with about 150 emergency dispatchers, that teaching opportunity actually exposed me to people around the country, to where that's when I came in contact with some folks over at Priority Dispatch. And I got a call and they said, hey, you're impacting the state of Florida. How would you like to impact the world? And at that time, that sounded kind of cliche, but it was just that. I flew out to Salt Lake City, met Dr. Clausen, and had a long, probably about 3-hour conversation with him about what he wanted to do on the adoption front. And then the rest is history at Priority Dispatch. And then, about 10 years later, after we had built out the implementation process, that we did great things in operations and building out our teams, it was time for me to fly on my own. And I thought that I was going to go out and start my own business. And I had my plan in place. And then I met some people locally that said, hey, there's an opportunity locally, and we think someone like you would be right for the job. And they were talking about VEC. And immediately I said, no, I'm really not going back into 911. And when they explained the model to me, it was intriguing. It's a unique model to where it's almost quasi-private in the way that it functions. We receive assessments from our agencies, but at the same time, we're standalone. And so we have a board of trustees, but there's a lot of things I saw immediately when I walked into the center that we could do that not only have an impact locally, but have an impact across the country.
And I've watched your journey, and it's interesting because where we intersected was at Priority Dispatch. I came on as an independent contractor, EMD implementer. And at the time, unfortunately for me in my civil service journey, it didn't line up well. I couldn't manage the travel that was required of being an implementer with my civil service and my 911 schedule. Right. So ultimately set that aside. Going, I laugh a lot because I'm like, I think about going back just to be doing shift work and being a dispatcher makes me physically ill. So, but look, listening to you say, hey, it's really set up differently. It's set up almost like a public sector company, even though we're an emergency communication center. That's very intriguing. Right. And I've watched some of your social media posts and some of the things going on in your center. And it's really, and this is why I wanted to sit down with you today, because like you've created an organizational culture that in all my travels, I haven't seen very often, maybe one or two times in one or two different 911 centers. And seeing how you prop your people up, acknowledge your people, celebrate your people, celebrate the wins, but acknowledge the losses, all of that incorporated into, the culture that you've built.
Right.
Is there certain influences that, you know, where you gain this type of mode of operation, certain influences, did it just come from the public sector, or did it come from leadership and previous, public sector roles?
I was fortunate enough early on in life where I had mentors that just had the gift of influence. And one was, his name was Ben Bryant. I started out at McDonald's, and,
Mm.
that's, you can laugh at that, but I really got, from a management and leadership perspective, some training that, is hard to get. And I'll give you an example. When I first started out, I was in the lobby, and I was in the lobby for about 3 months,
Hmm.
and I got a little frustrated. So I went to Ben and I said, Ben, I can do more than this. I can work the counter, I can work the grill. I could do other things. Why do you have me out here so long? And so he pulled me in and he says, hey, if people come in and the bathroom is not clean, what happens? And I said, well, they actually leave. And he said, okay. He says, what are our busiest times? And I told him Friday between the hours of this or that. And he says, okay, that's trend analysis. So he started going through these kind of iterations of things that I didn't realize that I was seeing. He was preparing me for business, but he said, hey, I know you didn't realize it, but now the principles of what you're learning from being in the lobby, you're going to take that with you throughout your entire career. I was like, oh my goodness. And then he brought me in and taught me everything about the business, from things like budgeting to ordering to those type of things that I learned at the age of 16 years old. But the biggest thing that he taught me was how to influence, how to get people to do things. You got to think of what the salary is like working at McDonald's, and you have to motivate people to meet milestones at such a salary. And so I watched him, and he trained me on how to get the best, or try to get the best out of individuals. And so over the years, I've been trying to do that, trying to get the best out of individuals, since, my early years. And that's what I focus on in my growth and development.
It's funny that you say that, and one of the things I was trying to look up here, but one of the things that working at McDonald's and gaining that early framework for your own leadership skills. And I had the fortune, in one of my previous podcasts, I had the good fortune of interviewing Howard Behar, which is one of the original founder CEO of Starbucks.
Right.
And one of the biggest takeaway, I've talked about this many times, one of his biggest takeaways though was the ones that push the broom get to make the first decisions, because if you're not pushing the broom, you don't know what's going on the inside.
That's right.
And I'm like, I mean, that's just, and I've kind of, as I, matured and gotten older as a leader, I've taken that with me, trying to empower the lower rank and file to have accountability, to have ownership in the mission,
Yep.
Ownership in the decision making,
Yep.
and ultimately prop them up to some point, taking our jobs, taking over for us when we decide to ride off into the sunset.
Absolutely.
You know, it's one of those lessons that you may or may not realize, especially at a young age at McDonald's. It's ironic that you realized at that point that, hey, this is teaching me something.
Yeah.
Because at that age group, you're probably like, you could have just brushed it off and like, whatever.
Yeah. And in that, I think the biggest thing when we talk about mentorship is someone looking at me, forecasting or projecting what I'm going to be, and telling me that you're from a leadership perspective, you're going to be in leadership for a long time. And
Right.
so while I have this moment in time with you, I'm going to infuse as much as I can. For someone to tell you that and see your future before you can is powerful. And so those
Yeah.
leaders out there that have the opportunity to do that,
Yeah.
you can move mountains.
Oh yeah, for sure. I take more value in lessons that I was presented with years ago. Now I take more value now than I did then.
Yep.
I had a friend of mine, a couple, 2, 3 years older than me. was constantly encouraging me to educate myself. Young firefighters in the firehouse, go take more classes, go get more certification, blah blah blah. And at that time, I'm like, yeah, but now it's like there was something behind that.
Right.
And I think that to have, to build a culture around a mission is something that can't be taken lightly. It's something that needs framework. There's ups and downs. We both know that.
Right.
I think based on like your topics within your own podcast of customer success, customer journeys, you can. And let me ask you this. Now I'm thinking about it. Do you apply that to your work at VEC?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things is, before we get to the application process, when I came into VEC, I'll be honest with you, we had vendors that were pretty much running the building. We had vendors that weren't showing up. We were paying, annual maintenance, and people that didn't quite readily know how to use various systems. And so first thing we had to do is bring the vendors in and sit them down to the table and say, this is the direction where we're going. If you want to continue to partner with us,
Yeah,
we have to have an excellent relationship, and you have to be agile and continue to build out. And in that relationship, we have to have a seat at the table on what you're building.
yeah,
That's the partnership that we're going to demand if you're going to have a relationship with VEC. And in seeing that, our members seeing that approach, because they didn't know that they could take that approach. They didn't know, the power that they have in the industry of being able to create by those partnerships. And so when they saw that, and they saw that influence, that industry influence, it meant a lot in their attitude and how they saw themselves as well. So the answer is yes.
yeah. No, that's fantastic. When you started, when you took over and there's not a lot of 911 centers that call their leader a CEO.
Mhm.
Most time it's directors, commissioners, operations managers. VEC is probably one of the few that call their leader a CEO.
Yep.
So as the CEO and you're sitting down in that chair and you start looking at what's the culture I want to build, what was the definition that you used for your culture that you wanted to use in your organization?
Yeah. That's a great question and a main point. A leader in an organization first has to understand what they're trying to build and define it, and then put vision behind it. And so
Mm-hmm.
what we're trying to build here is what we call a destination organization. And what that means is we want to be the blueprint in the country. We want to, where if there's anything that it is that's done, whether it's quality assurance, whether it's service to the community, whether it's technology implementations, whether it's how we serve our members, that we're the blueprint as to the example, and that makes others want to come to our organization, therefore being a destination organization. And so we believe that if we do that and we accomplish that, a lot of the issues and challenges that we're seeing out there with, staffing implications and things of that nature, we would have cured all of that by having that mindset that we are pushing things forward in the future as far as 911.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I look at, we both have had the good fortune of traveling around the country and seeing um, other 911 centers, other operations, and some really great ones, not so great. And prior to you taking over at VEC and seeing what you're doing at VEC, I think the next closest one that I saw that had culture like I hadn't seen before was New Orleans. I
Mhm.
had spent some time in New Orleans, and at that time, like what they were doing for their people, what they provided for their people, and New Orleans is not an easy city. New Orleans can be packed with millions of people at any given time during the year, not to
Right.
mention getting slammed into by hurricanes.
Yep.
Um, having that wherewithal of knowing, you know, that vision. You talked about that vision, and I heard that communicated not too long ago. The fire department that I'm involved with, volunteer firehouse, got a new fire chief,
Right.
and the fire chief comes in and says, "Hey, I'm taking over for this fire chief, but I'm not going to take over if I don't have the support of the vision that I have for the department.
Right.
So, that was very interesting. It was very new, and we've been in this department for a number of years, and going back even 15 or 20 years ago, we didn't talk about vision very often.
Right.
It was plans and goals and that, but that all plays a big factor. But you have to have the vision to kind of go forward.
Right.
Um, did you have any? Did you have any unhealthy parts of your organization outside the vendors? Did you have any unhealthy parts of your organization that you said you identified quick and said, we gotta fix that"?
Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest pieces is, you have to, you mentioned my title as a CEO, which is indicative of the role that I should play to push the organization forward to be the best that it could be. There's a lot of leaders in my role that don't have the advantage. Their heads down, they're in the weeds on a day-to-day basis, and therefore can't lift up their head in the 15% of time that it takes to dedicate every single day to envisioning and thinking through. They don't have it. And so where I'm going with this is I had to apply that also to supervisors and managers on the floor.
Mm,
One of the things that I saw quickly is a lot of them are call taking and dispatching and didn't have the opportunity to be able to lead and mentor their people on the floor. So let's recalibrate and re-envision what a leader is on the floor as far as the supervisor and manager role. Do you want them call taking and dispatching, or do you want them being able to look at their members and say, okay, that person, their body language is not right today. Let me pull them to the side and make sure they're okay. Or this person, I hear them having a difficult time. Let me just make sure that they're okay on this particular call, or let me go back through this call with them and support them and let them know that they actually did a great job. Or instead of them having to worry about a payroll issue, I'm here for you. You don't have to email, finance or human resources. I got your back. You just
right.
focus. So it's those type of things that I think that we need to see a shift in many organizations. The supervisor sitting on the floor, engaged call taking and dispatching, and can't be an advocate for their people on the floor. It's going to be tough to do a lot of things when you're trying to shift culture if your organization is set up that way.
That's so interesting because I think back to my old center, and I spent almost 20 years under a headset, and we had the similar setup where you had dispatchers, call takers, you had the supervisors, and then you had the shifts. You had supervisors and then shift supervisors.
Hmm.
Um, the shift supervisors didn't tend to work the floor unless they were on overtime,
Right.
and then they could work wherever they wanted if they didn't need to be shift supervisors. Um, and looking at the difference in hierarchy, and now you know who you needed to go to, and the supervisors can manage the people, interact with their people, and the non-shift supervisors, which I was a supervisor of dispatch operations, but I had to work as a dispatcher.
Right.
But it was kind of a stepping stone to that next level, that shift supervisor level.
Right.
But that's where you really learned who was a true leader and who was just a manager,
Right.
right? And you know, within some of the organizations that you've worked with, how do you empower your folks? Like, you recognize leadership skills in some people. How do you empower them to continue to learn, to continue to improve themselves, and not only to get to a leadership position, but once they get there, how to continue to grow as a leader and so on?
I think one thing you have to do is encourage them to step out of the bow. And when they do, if they make a mistake, you have to be the first one to say that's okay. And I
Hmm.
think the challenge is there's a lot of individuals, especially members in my organization, that are diamonds out there that either previously didn't have the opportunity to step up in certain roles, or had fears that if they stepped up and made a mistake that they would be disciplined. And so you have to remove that by showing real live examples of people stepping up and even making mistakes, and your response and reaction to it as a leader is critical.
Yeah.
um, and so I live by the thought of, if you have to create, like there's some organizations, you have think tank sessions where people get together and they go through ideals, and all of that is great. But when you've reached, I think, the epitome of what a learning organization should be, that comes with people just autonomously coming up with things and ideas and implementing them and not having fear. That's when you don't have to have that think tank session when you have the organization where people just are not afraid to think outside of the box and lead. So that's what we're trying to influence here, and I would encourage other leaders to look at that model as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, and I think you really hit the nail on the head with think tank, or we could think of it as collaboration, or again, it goes back to buying in the mission. I saw more successful results within my own former organization when you were part of a group that was collaborating on, and it could be a CAD upgrade, it could be a policy change,
Yep.
it could be health and wellness, whatever. I saw more positive results out of collaboration
Yes.
than a direction from
Yes.
the front office, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Nothing will, and you know this, nothing will piss off telecommunicators more in a 911 center to get a direction that has no context.
Yep. Yes. And you hit the nail on the head. That was the biggest shift in my leadership style. Early on, I felt like I had to have the answers. So I spent a lot of time on things. If I didn't know it, I would study, I would research, I would get the answers from networking. Now my time is focused on, infusing a culture to where people go out and get those answers and they feel the ability to be able to implement those things instead of me having to push those things forward. And that's what we're trying to do here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot of work because
Oh yeah,
some people they have fears of that, but we'll keep working at it.
yeah, for sure. I work through several different organizational structures within my organization. Every time a commissioner changed, the organizational culture, the structure changed. I worked for some really great bosses, and I worked for a not so great boss.
Right.
And I remember the not so great boss it was all by managing by fear. If you
Yeah.
mess up, we're going to write you up and you're going to get disciplined. That was it. There wasn't a retraining opportunity or a training opportunity or, why did you make that decision? It
Right.
was you were just getting disciplined.
Right.
And I still remember to this day, we had a supervisors meeting and one of the, administration said, well, within the last year or 6 months, whatever it was, we've been able to cut down on responder based complaints by 50%. I said, yep, congratulations. Everybody sitting on that floor is too scared to make a mistake or a decision. So they just toe the line and make sure that they're not going to get written up. That's how they're working right now. We did well.
Yep. Yeah. I tell you, if I don't, and this might sound weird to some, but I don't attend operational leadership meetings. I have
Oh,
chief of operations for that.
yeah.
My job is to pour into my C level. I have the chief of operations, chief of training, I have CFO, human resources, others,
Mm-hmm.
and my job is to acquire resources. And so,
Mm-hmm.
where some are, waiting until they go to budgets to ask for FTEs and, focusing kind of in the last couple of months, year round, I'm
Yeah.
focused on those resources, trying to do what we can to acquire those resources. And so, with those resources, as we hand them off, it's the chief of operations and others' responsibility to make things go and grow. If I'm sitting in a manager's meeting or shift supervisor's meeting, am I really doing the job that I'm supposed to be doing? Am I letting others lead? Am I letting other people make decisions that they need to make? And they'll come to me when something is murky and they need, direction. But
Mm-hmm.
I want them to feel the autonomy to be able to lead with their team instead of me. Because when I enter the room, a lot of times, and people don't, they would think that that would be different, but it's not. It shifts. The focus shifts a lot of times towards that executive leader that's in the room. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so again, it's just some lessons I've learned to learn how to get out of the room and let others lead.
Such a golden nugget there. And I think if anyone is in a leadership position in a public safety agency now once, or even in a corporate company, is let your leaders lead.
Mhm.
Give them that long enough leeway and long enough road to let them lead. They will come to you when something isn't going right. We can almost guarantee that, being in the top spot. Um, and you get to, and it's something else I took from Jocko Willink. Jocko
Mhm.
Willink promotes leading from behind.
Right.
let your team go do their thing and stop them if they're going to kill themselves.
Exactly.
Outside of that, let them go.
Yeah.
Lead from behind, and I take a lot of value in that.
Yes. Yeah.
So let's pivot a little bit. I know we talked about VEC and 911 and our travels and different things, but coming full circle with the travel. So you got things kind of clicking on all cylinders at VEC. You're doing thing, and you decide to start a podcast because I'm sure you got extra 5 minutes in your day. So why not start a podcast? I live the
Right.
same life.
Right.
What was the motivator in saying, hey, I'm gonna start this podcast because I think this is something to talk about.
Yeah. It was a couple of things. It was one, coming back and realizing that there were barriers with vendors, that if those barriers weren't removed, then there is no way that we could be successful in what we're trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
Intricately, we have great members and they do a great job on a day-to-day basis, but tech makes our lives easier. I just have
Yeah.
to admit it. It's not, the driving force, but it's something that, if we can get that right, we can do great things for our citizens. Think of language translation as an example, and
Right.
being able to, get information quicker and a response quicker to citizens that might not speak English, right? So with that, I said, one of the things is building a great relationship with vendors. That was one thing that was top of mind, and having those agile relationships. But did they really know how they should treat agencies? The
Yeah.
thought is there, but is the experience there? I started hearing about large vendors that weren't achieving adoption, and that was
Mm.
a thing that was top of mind as well. To where all of these great things, all of the tech stack that you would have or need, but couldn't achieve adoption because going into the center, it wasn't being influenced in a way that just stuck. Right. So
Yeah.
that was one thing. And then I started getting some phone calls from some individuals in those organizations about, hey, how can we get better? How can we do better from a customer success standpoint? And those conversations became more frequent. And then I got, hey, you should start a podcast. All this stuff that you have in your brain, and that's how the podcast started. It was just basically, going through the iteration of, seeing local needs, but then having conversations with those companies and saying, hey, we need to get this out there.
That's so interesting that like one spark generates the idea, that generates the action, that generates what you create. And early on, I've had, there's no hidden secret. I've had a few different podcasts. Well, one or did better than the other, and so on. One of the things I learned, as I consumed content and learned about podcasting and different things, was don't be afraid to approach somebody that seems unapproachable,
Right.
because typically they just want to help and they're willing to help. The worst thing they could say is, no, I don't have time right now.
Right.
And so I was fortunate enough to have some, to me, big deal guests on a couple of my original podcasts.
Right.
And I see the guests that you've had on. I mean, CEOs, CEO of Prepared, CEO of Carbine,
Right.
and so on. Like these are people with all kinds of experience, all kinds of knowledge to be able to pass on. Did you? Is it one of those things where you went out and sought them and said, "Listen, I think you'd be a great conversation. Come on my podcast," or was it the other way around? They saw you and said, "Hey, you're doing a great thing. We'd like to participate."
I think it was a little bit of both.
Oh, okay.
I think early on, I had some guests, Scott McDonald, Michael Martin of Rapid SOS, right? And so being able to secure those spots, I think meant a lot to others, and others took notice, because if you have individuals like that are prominent names in the space
Yeah.
coming on, others took notice. And so I think it was that. But I also think that, those names that you talked about, they understand the adoption issue.
Mm-hmm.
They're eager to serve, but there's some barriers. Let's be honest about it. There's some barriers in public safety to where you have directors out there that would say that they're implementation or technology fatigued, or just don't have the staff or resources to be able to implement. If they do implement, the risk of getting it wrong is so high, especially in their role. So there's fear. And so having individuals come on the podcast and show that there is support, there are customer success departments, they are thinking about how to help achieve adoption and be able to handhold all the way through not only the implementation process and beyond, I think is very important.
No, that's fantastic. Yeah, and it's realistically when you have the motive to give back and to provide so other people can learn from these experts that I mean, it makes it, and I got to give you credit because I had put my podcast to bed. My podcasting was put to bed. It's a lot of work. I'm sure you found it's a
Yeah.
lot of work.
Yep.
But I have to give you credit because I was on your podcast and it was so much fun. It was such a great conversation. I'm like, I think I want to do this again.
Yeah.
So, and that's what created. And now I'm 14 episodes back into it, and my very first one I did over 100 episodes.
Yep.
It's a ton of work, but it can be so. I've taken so much away from it. I've learned a lot from people that I've talked to. I get excited about a lot of the guests that I get to interact with, and some of them I wouldn't have interacted with if I wasn't, I didn't have them on my podcast. So I guess long-winded point, I have to give you credit for the start of this podcast because it really kind of got the juices flowing of wanting to create and do this again because it's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I love what you're doing. Your podcast is solutions based and
Yeah.
very interested in solution based podcasts. Another one out there is First Call Ready,
Hmm.
where they're really digging into what's happening on the floor. How do we get better? How do we improve?
Mm,
What culture should we infuse, and how do we infuse that culture?
yeah.
And not just putting the responsibility on the leaders, but putting the responsibility on the folks or the members on the floor as well.
Yep.
There's a lot of stuff out there that's talking about mental health and mental awareness, and all of that
Yep.
stuff has its space.
Yep.
But I think what has been lacking, which you fill that gap, probably beyond the launch, First Call Ready, is what do we do about it? Right?
Right.
We know that it's there, but what are the solutions? And so, from a tech perspective, the better you can implement, the better you can solve some of the issues you have on the mental health side as well, because things become a little bit easier. So,
Yeah. No,
yeah,
that's fantastic. Yeah. No, when you're coming from a place of being of service, and that's always been my thing, being of service. You want to be of service to people. There's no reason to. There's many podcasts out there. They're there for monetary reasons, and they have that backing and so
right,
on. Okay, more power to them.
right,
But like for me and starting this, it was always about sitting down and having a conversation and learning something and collaborate. I've learned more from sitting in a group, um, talking and collaborating and like I talk about with the creation of this podcast, sitting around the kitchen or the coffee table of the firehouse and solving all the world's problems over 2 cups of coffee.
right,
I think there's a lot, and the world's moving so fast. The technology is changing so fast.
right.
Um, and it's sometimes it's frustrating and tough to keep up. I think being able to share this kind of information and to present those solutions and being solutions based can help some folks alleviate those frustrations and confusion and so on because there are answers to a lot of different problems that occur.
There are
Yeah.
certainly, and so that's what season two of Beyond the Launch is about. We're going to be a bit more provocative in the questions that we're asking, as far
Mm,
as we know that there's fear of AI. We know that
yeah.
people feel that their job is going to be taken away from AI. Let's get into those questions while
Yeah.
we're talking about the solutions, and let's not sugarcoat it. Let's really talk about how to make this thing better in the 911 space.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
Fantastic. I think that's a great place to leave it. Ivan, great stuff, and like I said, a lot of golden nuggets in this. What's if you could leave one thing, one statement, one golden nugget here at the end? What would it be for you?
I think what all of us are doing, we should be very proud.
Mm,
Working in the 911 space in the public sector, is being able to save lives. It is a privilege for me to serve. It is an honor for me to serve. But in that, I have a deeper responsibility, and that is, I'm 30 years in, and so
mm,
leaving that legacy of bringing others to the fold and making sure that I infuse whatever was infused in me and interject that into others, at least giving an opportunity. I judge leaders by, those that follow them when they don't have to, and also what that leader is producing. And so if that leader is producing individuals that are able to reach their potential, that's a great thing. And so, here at VEC, we want to be a destination where people can come, and we want to populate the 911 community across the country with executive directors. We want to be a building block here where others can go out and actually lead other organizations. And that might sound weird or different. And to where, yeah,
Yeah.
we want people to come and stay for 30 years. But the reality is, if you're growing people, they will move on. And that's a
Yeah.
good thing. And so, my message is continue to grow your people. Continue to have the audacity to be great, and don't fear of people knowing what you know. Just continue to funnel that information, and think great things will happen. Lives will be saved.
That's so good. And the best part of that, and I want to repeat it, become the leader that other people follow when they don't have to.
Yep. Yep.
That's phenomenal. That is phenomenal. So, Ivan, if people wanted to connect with you, what would be the best way to connect with you, either online or otherwise?
Yep. So if it's the podcast, it's Beyond the Launch at Outlook.com. And then if it's related to VEC, it's I Whitaker at VEC911.com.
Awesome. Ivan, thank you so much again for joining me. A lot of great stuff. Love to have you again. Again, open door anytime you want to talk about something.
Thank you, man.
Um, yeah,
Same here. Same here. Thank you, man. Great stuff.
yeah,
Okay, now.
absolutely.
Okay.
That concludes episode 14 of At the Kitchen Table podcast for today. I appreciate you all pulling up a chair to the kitchen table and listen to this great conversation between me and Ivan Whitaker of the Salt Lake City Valley Emergency Communication Center and Beyond the Launch podcast. Some great leadership lessons, organizational lessons, and a great conversation about starting and sustaining a podcast that allows you to be of service. I'd love to hear you drop a comment. Let us know your thoughts on the podcast, and any experiences you think are valuable to share. Put that in the comments. Share it with anyone that might get any value out of it. We're trying to build a small community around this podcast, and I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Have a great day.